My father slammed his heavy palm onto the mahogany dinner table so hard that the crystal water goblets rattled in unison. You are relieved of your duties at the firm until you publicly apologize to your brother Julian, my father barked across the room. I was 36 years old. 24 family members and high society guests sat along the festive Christmas Eve table in our Seattle estate. Every single one of them stopped eating. A few uncles chuckled under their breath. My cousins exchanged smirking glances. My face burned with a searing heat that radiated all the way to my collar, but I didn't yell. I didn't break down. I looked my father straight in the eye and said 2 words. Understood, Dad. I am Nora Vance. I was 36, a licensed marine structural engineer who spent 8 years designing deep-water dock infrastructure for the U.S. Navy before returning to manage our family's commercial maritime logistics firm, Vance Logistics Enterprise. None of that mattered to my father, Victor Vance. To him, I was just the headstrong daughter who took things too personally. My brother Julian, 39, was a polished corporate director who knew how to wrap incompetence in expensive suits. Dad trusted Julian with every bank key, contract signature, and board decision. If Julian made a mistake, Dad called it a calculated risk. If I brought up a factual concern, Dad called it emotional insubordination. My mother, Beatrice, sat at the opposite end of the table. She was a refined woman who spent decades protecting her own peace by staying silent whenever Dad humiliated me. The only person who had ever truly seen me was my grandfather, Admiral Arthur Vance. Before he passed away 4 months earlier, he watched me quietly endure another one of Dad's public lectures and told me in private, "Nora, never let men who built nothing dictate the value of what you anchor." After dinner ended, while my father and Julian celebrated with scotch in the parlor, I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom. I didn't cry. I pulled my duffel bag from the closet, packed my blueprints, personal laptop, and essential records, and walked out the back door into the freezing Seattle rain. By midnight, I was sitting in a quiet motel near the Puget Sound docks, staring at an old steel lockbox Grandfather Arthur had handed me 3 days before his death. Inside was a sealed manila envelope, labeled "To Nora," open when Victor shows his hand. Inside was a formal legal letter from Arthur's lifelong attorney, Jonathan Cross, along with a certified copy of Grandfather's master trust charter. Grandfather hadn't left the primary maritime voting shares to my father or Julian. He had placed the entire $18 million logistics holding company under a restricted military-grade protective trust, naming me as the sole managing trustee the moment any unauthorized asset liquidations were attempted. Attached was an audit log showing that over the past 6 months, Julian and my father had been secretly transferring millions out of company emergency reserves to cover Julian's failed offshore real estate ventures. At 7:30 a.m. the next morning, I walked into Jonathan Cross's downtown Seattle office. Jonathan looked up from his desk, unsurprised. "I wondered when Victor would push you too far, Nora," Jonathan said quietly, pulling out a master binder. "It's time to execute the trust." At 9 a.m., my father walked into the family guest suite at the estate, expecting to find me sitting in the dark, waiting to apologize. Instead, he found the bed made, the closet bare, and my company badge left flat on the nightstand. Before he could dial my number, the front door of the estate slammed open downstairs. Jonathan Cross walked into the foyer, flanked by 2 armed federal court marshals holding a freeze order. My father rushed down the staircase, furious. "What is the meaning of this intrusion, Cross?" Jonathan Cross looked at my father with icy calm and asked, "Victor, what on earth have you and Julian done?" My father stood on the marble landing of the foyer, his face flushed with rage as he glared down at Jonathan Cross and the 2 federal court marshals. "I am the chairman of Vance Logistics Enterprise," my father roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You have no legal right to step into my home with federal officers." "You were the chairman, Victor," Jonathan Cross replied smoothly, pulling a blue-bound legal decree from his leather briefcase. "Until 8 a.m. this morning, when Nora officially executed Section 4 of Admiral Arthur Vance's Master Trust Charter. Julian emerged from the kitchen holding a cup of espresso, his expensive suit pristine, but the color instantly drained from his face the moment his eyes landed on the legal seal in Jonathan's hand. "What is he talking about, Dad?" Julian asked, his voice wavering slightly. "Grandfather left the voting shares to you." "Your grandfather left managing authority to your father, on the strict condition that company capital reserves remained untouched," Jonathan stated, stepping into the center of the living room. "3 weeks ago, an automated flag alerted my firm that $4.2 million had been quietly siphoned out of the Deepwater Infrastructure Fund and wired to a shell entity in the Cayman Islands registered under your name, Julian." My mother walked out of the dining room, her hands trembling as she adjusted her cardigan. "Jonathan, please, it's Christmas morning. Can't this be handled privately after the holidays?" "It was handled privately, Beatrice," Jonathan said, looking at her with quiet pity, "until Victor decided to publicly humiliate the only licensed engineer protecting this family from financial ruin." Just then, I walked through the front doors, wearing my dark charcoal trench coat, holding my tablet loaded with the complete forensic ledger. My father's eyes locked onto mine, burning with fury. "You," he spat, taking 2 heavy steps down the stairs. "You did this. You went running to Arthur's lawyer because your pride was hurt at dinner." "I didn't go to Jonathan because of dinner, Dad," I said, my voice completely steady as I looked up at him. "I went to Jonathan because while you were busy trying to ground a 36-year-old woman, Julian was bankrupting the company grandfather spent 40 years building." I swiped open my tablet and displayed the offshore transfer routing slips right in front of my father. Julian stepped forward frantically. "Dad, don't listen to her. It was an investment. I was going to return the funds once the Lake Union development cleared." "The Lake Union development was denied permits 2 months ago, Julian," I revealed, cutting him off cold. "You didn't invest that money. You used it to pay off margin calls on your failed cryptocurrency hedge fund. And Dad signed off on the transfer without even reading the line item because he trusts your title more than he ever trusted my engineering audits." My father took the tablet from my hand. As his eyes scanned the official bank routing numbers, signature lines, and the federal freeze notices, his arrogant posture completely collapsed. He looked at Julian, then back at the ledger, his jaw tightening in horror. "The federal court-martials are here to serve a formal temporary restraining order," Jonathan announced firmly. "Effective immediately, all corporate accounts for Vance Logistics Enterprise are frozen under Nora's direct trustee authority. Victor, Julian, you are both officially suspended from company premises pending a full board audit." "You can't kick me out of my own company," my father shouted, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. "I am your father." I looked at him, feeling no anger, no satisfaction, only a profound, quiet clarity. "You stopped acting like my father a long time ago, Victor," I said softly. "You wanted me to learn my place. This is it." My father stared at me in stunned silence, the paper trembling in his hand. For 36 years, he had counted on my silence, my need for approval, and my willingness to keep the peace. He had built his authority on the assumption that I would never hit back. "Nora!" My mother stepped forward, her voice cracked with desperation. "He's your father. Julian is your brother. You can't do this to your own family." "Family doesn't siphon $4 million and leave its workers facing layoffs, Mom," I replied, my voice steady and low. "Family doesn't humiliate you in front of 24 people just to cover up their own failure." Over the next 4 weeks, the illusion my father and brother had spent years maintaining completely dissolved. Jonathan Cross and my team of forensic accountants conducted a full audit of Vance Logistics Enterprise. The findings were devastating. Julian had not only lost $4.2 million in offshore crypto accounts, But he had also delayed crucial safety overhauls on our deepwater docks to keep the company's profit margins looking inflated on paper. Had I not stepped in, the dock infrastructure in Puget Sound would have failed inspection within months, costing hundreds of maritime workers their livelihoods and exposing the firm to crippling federal liabilities. Faced with overwhelming evidence of fiduciary breach and unauthorized transfers, my father chose to step down permanently as chairman rather than face a public trial. Julian was forced to surrender all his personal stock options to repay the siphoned capital, effectively severing his ties with the company. He took an entry-level analyst job in another state, stripped of the unearned title he had hidden behind for over a decade. As the primary trustee under Grandfather Arthur's charter, I assumed full executive control of Vance Logistics Enterprise. I immediately authorized the long-overdue dock infrastructure upgrades, secured our deepwater permits, and restructured the company's governance so that no single executive, including myself, could ever move capital without independent board oversight. Every single one of our 45 maritime engineering and logistics jobs remained intact. 2 months later, my mother visited my office at the docks. She sat across from my desk, looking at the framed photograph of Grandfather Arthur, standing on a Navy vessel that I kept beside my blueprints. "I spent 30 years letting your father make all the rules, because I was terrified of what would happen if I stood up to him," she admitted quietly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I am so sorry, Nora. I let him hurt you because it was easier for me." "It took me a long time to realize," I said, reaching across the desk to gently hold her hand, "that staying quiet to keep the peace isn't peace at all. It's just delayed conflict. Today, Vance Logistics Enterprise is stronger, more transparent, and more profitable than it has ever been. I no longer seek my father's validation, nor do I measure my worth by how much disrespect I can endure in the name of family loyalty." Grandfather Arthur was right. True strength isn't about power, titles, or loud voices at a dinner table. It's about standing firm when everything around you tries to pull you off your anchor.